The hero's journey had reached its end. 10 years of battles and hardships concluded on a gentle evening as Frieren, an elven mage, and her companions stood upon the ramparts of the capital. The demon king had fallen by their hand, and at last peace dawned across the land. Crowds cheered their names: Himmel the brave hero, Eisen the stoic dwarf warrior, Heiter the kind-hearted priest, and Frieren the quiet elven mage. But Frieren's amber eyes drifted upward, drawn to the first stars pricking through the dusk. She had seen countless nights in her long life, yet this one felt special. Overhead a streak of light flashed, a meteor heralding an era meteor's shower soon to come. Himmel noticed her gaze and smiled gently. "It looks like we arrived just in time," he said. As twilight deepened, the four heroes climbed the highest tower to watch the night sky. One by one, silvery meteors began to rain in silence. The friends stood shoulder to shoulder as they had through every trial, now bathed in starlight instead of battle's fire. Frieren's delicate face remained calm and unreadable, but inside she felt a quiet wonder at the celestial display. Himmel sighed in contentment. "An era of peace begins tonight," he murmured, "under these very stars." Frieren turned to her companions in that tranquil moment. The victory was complete. Tomorrow they would part ways. For an elf like Frieren, who measured time in centuries, 10 years of companionship had passed in a blink. She knew each of these dear friends only as a brief warm light in her long life, and yet something in her chest tightened at the thought of saying farewell. Himmel, with his golden hair now tousled by the night breeze, glanced at Frieren. He sensed her distant melancholy and offered a playful grin. "No tearful goodbyes, all right," he teased gently. "After all, it would be embarrassing when we met again." Frieren tilted her head, considering his words. The others chuckled. They had all promised to meet again one day. Indeed, the era meteor's shower would return in 50 years, a mere blink for Frieren. She spoke softly, her voice like a breeze through leaves. "In 50 years' time, there will be another meteor shower, even grander than this. I could guide us to a place in the mountains with an unobstructed view. Perhaps we might watch it together." Himmel laughed, eyes bright at the idea. Heiter and Eisen exchanged amused looks. 50 years was a long time for humans, but the hero Himmel extended his hand to Frieren with unflinching warmth. "It's a promise. We'll all reunite and see that sky again," he declared. Frieren nodded, a small, almost hidden smile on her lips as she locked that promise in her heart. The meteors streaked across the heavens like trails of hope. In that serene silence, none of them shed a tear at parting. Instead, they shared a companionable quiet, four friends, bound by triumph and trust, watching stars fall into the endless night. When the last meteor faded, Frieren's journey with them truly ended. Dawn broke, and with light backpacks and heavy hearts, they prepared to go separate ways. At the great stone bridge out of the capital, Frieren turned back to face her companions one more time. Morning sun painted Himmel's hair a soft silver. Hitter's wrinkled eyes crinkled in a smile. Eisen, ageless by dwarven blood, gave a respectful nod. Frieren was youthful and unchanged as ever, appearing as a slight, silver-haired young woman, despite her decades of age. But something new flickered in her golden gaze. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, perhaps to thank them, perhaps to say she would miss them. But she remembered Himmel's gentle jibe, and instead offered a formal bow. Himmel stepped forward, his cape fluttering behind him, and extended to Frieren a keepsake, a small ring set with a polished stone, the color of dusk. "Until we meet again," he said, pressing it into her palm. Frieren studied the ring curiously. She didn't yet grasp the depth of sentiment behind the gift, only that Himmel wanted her to have it. So she tucked it safely into the pouch at her belt. With that, Frieren departed, light on her feet, bound for distant horizons. Behind her, the three remaining heroes watched the slim figure recede. Himmel raised a hand in farewell, no tears in his eyes, only a hopeful light. Though Frieren did not look back, she heard him call out cheerfully, "Don't forget our reunion. It's a promise." She lifted her arm in a silent wave, and so Frieren set off alone, an immortal elf carrying centuries ahead of her, and behind her, 3 friends who would live on only in memory, at least for now. Frieren wandered far and wide in the ensuing years. She was a mage through and through, drawn to magical knowledge like a moth to flame. While kingdoms rebuilt in peace, Frieren roamed the central lands, visiting quaint villages and towering libraries, gathering every spell and charm she could find. Many were trivial enchantments by grand design, a spell to make tea piping hot in an instant, or one to turn ripe grapes sour for a peculiar palate. But to Frieren, each spell was a precious treasure. She would trade monster slaying or odd jobs in exchange for old grimoires and crumbling scrolls, delighting in the smallest new discovery. Sometimes she paused in an open field at twilight, watching the stars alone and recalling that meteor night with her friends. But an elf's heart is accustomed to solitude. Decades slipped by like petals on the wind. The promised 50 years passed almost without Frieren noticing. She remained outwardly the same, youthful, unaged, her long snowy white braid fluttering as she walked. But the world around her changed. Kingdoms flourished. Children became grandparents. And so one autumn evening, Frieren found herself approaching the capital city once more. The skyline had transformed. New buildings of marble and clay rose where old battlements once stood. The bustle of human life had an unfamiliar rhythm. Fashions and faces changed by half a century. Frieren paused at the city gates, feeling for the first time a twinge of uncertainty. For her, 50 years was a brief chapter. For her human friends, it was nearly a lifetime. Would Himmel and the others even recognize the same elf who had left so long ago? As she walked the streets in the failing light, Frieren's heart quickened. She carried with her a shadow dragon's horn, an artifact from their adventure, once entrusted to Himmel for safekeeping. She had thought to retrieve it during their reunion. But now that moment was at hand. The horn was the last thing on her mind. She followed familiar lanes toward Himmel's old home. To her sharp ears came murmurs from townsfolk. "That woman, doesn't she resemble the mage who traveled with hero Himmel ages ago?" Another whispered, "It can't be, she looks far too young." The spitting image from the statues. Frieren paid them no heed. Human gossip skimmed off her like rain off a leaf. But inwardly she realized how out of place she must seem, unchanged by time, walking among the great-grandchildren of those she'd once saved. At the gate of a modest cottage on a hill overlooking the capital, Frieren halted. The door creaked open before she could knock. An aged man stepped out slowly, supporting himself with an ornate sword that glinted even in dusk. His hair was snow-white and thin, his face lined with years of kindness, yet those blue eyes, bright with tears unshed, were unmistakable. "Frieren," he greeted in a voice trembling between joy and disbelief. It was Himmel, the hero of men, now an old man. Frieren stood very still, eyes wide. She had known to expect him older, but the reality of his frailty struck her like an unexpected wind. To her, he had been in the prime of his youth, only a short while ago. Now he approached slowly, each step a small effort, and yet the smile he gave her was the same one that had warmed countless hearts decades past. "You have aged," Frieren said softly, not meaning rudeness, but stating fact as elves do. Himmel chuckled, a warm sound like distant thunder. 50 years tend to do that to humans, my friend. You, on the other hand." He peered at her youthful face, unchanged from memory, and gave a gentle nod. "You look exactly as I remember. It's good to see you again, Frieren." The elf found herself unsure how to reply. Relief perhaps touched her ancient heart. Relief that he was here to meet her at all. She extended the wrapped shadow dragon's horn that she had come to fetch. but Himmel waved it aside playfully. That can wait. We have a meteor shower to prepare for, don't we? His eyes shone with genuine happiness that Frieren had returned as promised. Within the cottage, Frieren reunited with Hitter and Eisen as well. Hitter had become a high bishop in the holy city in those years, and he too was now elderly. His back bent and the wild ginger beard she remembered gone to gray. Even so, Hitter greeted Frieren with hearty laughter, marveling at her unchanged appearance. Eisen, being a dwarf, looked much the same as ever, perhaps a touch more grizzled, but still broad and robust. The reunion was quiet but heartfelt. Over a humble supper at Himmel's hearth, the four reminisced about the old journey. Himmel's hand shook slightly as he poured Frieren a cup of spiced wine. I've waited for this day, he admitted in a soft tone when the others stepped outside for a moment. To travel with you all once more. Frieren studied the hero's weathered face. So many years had passed for him, years in which she had not been present. At that thought, a pinprick of guilt surfaced in her heart. Had she been thoughtless to let decades roll by without so much as a letter or visit? At the time it hadn't occurred to her. Humans always seemed to have more time, until suddenly they didn't. Under the velvet sky, the four companions embarked on one last journey together. Frieren led them out of the capital, northward into the countryside, where the view of the meteor shower would be clearest. It took them a week's gentle travel, a journey far easier than the trials they'd faced in youth, yet infinitely more precious for its rarity. They walked at a pace to accommodate Himmel's aging limbs. Occasionally, Frieren cast concerned glances when Himmel grew short of breath, but he always insisted he was fine, buoyed by an almost childlike excitement. Each night they camped under open skies, much as they had during their quest, and each night, Himmel would point out constellations to Frieren, recalling how he'd done so decades before, when she showed only passing interest. Now Frieren listened more intently. She found she liked hearing him talk about the stars, even if she knew their names from long ago. It was the sound of his voice, warm, familiar, that filled her with a quiet contentment. They passed by villages that had once been stops on their grand quest. Many faces were new, but a few elders recognized their saviors with astonished tears. A kindly herbalist, now elderly herself, pressed wildflowers into Himmel's hands in gratitude for saving her life in a monster attack 40 years prior. When she saw Frieren among them, looking untouched by time, the old woman murmured in awe, "The elf mage returns, truly blessed by the goddess." Frieren gently corrected her, "Not blessed, just long-lived." But she accepted a flower as well, tucking it into her braid. Eisen led them to a calm lake, nestled in rolling hills, the spot Frieren had picked for viewing the meteors. The sky that night was exceptionally clear. Stars speckled the heavens like scattered diamonds on black velvet. As they settled by the shore, their reflections shimmered faintly in the lake's mirror-still water. Four silhouettes side by side once more, as if time itself had rewound for this instant. When at last the Era meteors began to streak across the cosmos, none of them spoke. They gazed upward in collective wonder. Trails of light, dozens at a time, arced overhead and vanished, leaving the sky ever-changing and alive. Himmel's lined face was illuminated in celestial silver. Tears glistened in his eyes, but a smile of pure gratitude graced his lips. He reached out, and without a word, gave Frieren's slender hand a gentle squeeze. She started in surprise. Such gestures of affection were still somewhat foreign to her, but she did not pull away. She felt the tremble in his hand, and heard the faint hitch in his breath. In that moment Frieren realized, for Himmel and the others, this reunion under the stars was possibly the happiest moment of their lives. And for Himmel it might be the last great moment. A subtle ache bloomed in Frieren's heart as she realized how fragile the life of her dear friend truly was. Himmel broke the silence softly. "Frieren, thank you." A meteor's reflection danced in his moist eyes as he continued, voice warm and weak, Thank you for this wonderful final adventure." Frieren's throat tightened inexplicably. She turned to face him fully. The hero's face, though aged, held the same kindness and unyielding spirit she'd known, and now it was directed solely at her, brimming with gratitude and unspoken feelings. She felt suddenly unworthy. After all, she had hardly understood him all those years ago. She had treated their 10-year quest as ephemeral, failing to learn even his simplest likes and dreams beyond the mission. Why was he thanking her? She should be the one to thank them. And yet the words caught in her chest. She managed a small nod, afraid that if she tried to speak, her voice might break the magic of the moment. The meteors continued their silent symphony across the sky. One particularly bright streak flared overhead, painting their faces in pale blue light. Frieren closed her eyes briefly and made a rare wish upon that shooting star. That this moment could last just a little longer. That time would be merciful tonight. The star fell beyond the horizon, and darkness returned in full. At length, the chill of pre-dawn came over the lake. The meteors waned, and the night grew still. Eisen gently packed up their belongings. Heiter murmured a prayer of thanks under his breath. Frieren realized Himmel's hand had gone limp in hers. Himmel had passed away quietly, sitting beside Frieren as the stars faded. His smile remained peaceful and content, and his gaze still aimed skyward, as if watching a meteor's trail. Only he could see. Frieren did not at first register what had happened. "Himmel," she whispered, lightly shaking his shoulder. But the hero of men did not respond. Beside him, the wild flowers from the herbalist slipped from his slackened grip, scattering onto the ground. Himmel was gone. The long journey of his life ended in the same gentle way that journey's epilogue had begun, under a canopy of shooting stars with his dearest friends nearby. Heiter and Eisen bowed their heads, grief and reverence mingling in their expressions. Frieren found herself frozen, her ageless face expressionless as ever, yet an unfamiliar emptiness yawned within her. She had seen death before. As an adventurer, she'd seen countless passings of both friend and foe, but Himmel's death felt different. He had been a constant, a bright presence she had mistakenly assumed would always be there in some way. After all, they had promised to meet again, and indeed they had, only for him to slip away moments later, like a last star blinking out at dawn. They carried Himmel's body gently back to the capital. A grand funeral was held for the beloved hero. The entire city turned out in mourning. Black banners flew at half-mast, and the autumn air rang with church bells. In the cathedral square, beneath stained glass depictions of ancient heroes, Himmel was laid in an open coffin. He wore his hero's armor polished to a mirror sheen, his sword, the very sword that struck down the Demon King, resting atop his chest. Bouquets of white lilies and mountain wildflowers cradled his form, a bed of nature's purity for the hero who had saved humanity. Frieren stood between Eisen and Heiter during the ceremony. He, as a high bishop, officiated the rites through trembling lips. His voice echoed in the vaulted chamber as he spoke of Himmel's courageous deeds and the hope he brought to the world. Eisen's craggy face remained stony, but he held his helmet at his side respectfully, eyes closed in silent prayer for his friend. As for Frieren, she stood with hands clasped loosely before her, head slightly bowed. Outwardly she appeared detached, a tranquil elf who did not shed a single tear. Whispering murmurs spread through some onlookers. "See the elven mage? She doesn't even cry for him. Were they truly friends?" Another replied, "Elves are strange folk, maybe she feels nothing." Such words drifted to Frieren's keen ears, but she made no reaction. Truthfully, she herself did not fully understand the storm inside her. She felt hollow, as though some crucial part of her life had quietly slipped away, leaving an ache that years of solitude had not prepared her to handle. After the eulogies, as a hush fell over the gathering, Frieren stepped forward. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor as she approached Himmel's coffin. He looked so at peace, as if at any moment he might chuckle and tease her for being late, or forgetting something trivial. Frieren's lips parted. What was she meant to say? How could she put words to the gratitude and regret tangling inside her? She thought of the countless conversations she never had with him, questions about his childhood, his favorite songs, the dreams he nurtured beyond their quest. Why did I never ask? She wondered. In her long life, she had assumed there would always be more time. Now time was the one thing no magic could grant. She knelt and, with utmost tenderness, placed the shadow dragon's horn, the artifact she'd retrieved, beside Himmel's sword in the coffin. It had been a silly reason to return, she realized. The horn meant nothing compared to what she'd truly missed. Frieren found herself speaking in a near whisper, words meant for Himmel alone. I'm sorry, I should have tried to know you better. Her voice did not waver, but in her chest, an ache sharpened. She remembered Himmel on that first meteor night, telling her not to cry because they would meet again. Now here he was, having kept that promise, and she was the one left behind. A single tear formed at the corner of her eye, a tiny shining thing, but Frieren blinked it back before it could fall. No tearful goodbyes. She heard his playful voice in her memory, and held fast to it. As Frieren rose, Hyder came to her side. The old priest gently placed a hand on her shoulder in support. In a quiet, firm tone, loud enough for nearby gossipers to overhear, Hyder said, Himmel died happy, you know. Frieren looked at the kindly priest in mild surprise. Hyder offered a reassuring smile. He told me in his final confession that traveling with you even briefly again made his life complete. Do not let anyone tell you that you don't grieve, Frieren. We all grieve in our own ways. At this Frieren gave the faintest nod. It was true. Her way was subtle, perhaps invisible to human eyes, but the weight of loss on her ancient soul was very real. After the funeral rites were done, and Himmel was interred beneath a noble oak in the royal cemetery, Frieren lingered until twilight beside his grave. A small gathering of townsfolk, those who had loved Himmel, remained at a respectful distance. Frieren was mostly silent. She poured a full bottle of Himmel's favorite aged wine over the fresh earth of his burial mound, a final toast to her friend, as was a tradition among some mercenary bands they had encountered long ago. The rich liquid darkened the soil and filled the air with a sweet aroma. In a low voice, she spoke to the grave as if to Himmel directly. Farewell, until we meet again. Those words carried both her sorrow and a hint of hope, hope that perhaps somewhere, somehow, she would meet him again to say all the things left unsaid. Before departing the cemetery, Frieren carefully took from her pouch the ring Himmel had given her at their first parting. She had kept it safe all this time. Only now, as she examined its fine craftsmanship under the dimming light, did she notice the subtle motif carved into it, a delicate mirrored lotus flower. It triggered an old recollection, a legend that mirrored lotuses symbolized eternal love. Frieren's chest constricted with a feeling she could not quite name. Had Himmel? She closed her fingers around the ring and pressed it to her heart briefly. Then she returned it securely to her pouch. If eternal love was what it symbolized, she would treasure it all the more. Without another word, Frieren left the resting place of the hero, stepping forward into a future that suddenly felt far emptier than before. In the days following Himmel's death, Frieren found herself adrift. For the first time in decades, perhaps centuries, she had no clear direction. Magic and knowledge had been her pursuits, but they felt hollow at this moment. She spent quiet hours at the small house of mourning with Hetter and Eisen, reminiscing softly. It was during one such evening that Hetter, coughing into a handkerchief, his age and years of hard living catching up to him, beckoned Frieren outside to the garden. There, beneath a sky turning violet with dusk, stood a young human girl with large, curious eyes of amethyst. She was perhaps 9 or 10 years old, with long lavender hair tied in a simple ribbon. The girl looked at Frieren both in awe and shyness. "This is Fern," he had her introduced, his voice gentle. The little girl clutched at the sleeve of Hehader's robe, peeking at Frieren from behind his leg. Frieren offered the child a tentative smile. She rarely interacted with human children. They grew so fast and were gone so soon in her reckoning. But something about Fern's gaze, wide with equal parts fear and hope, tugged at her. Hehader's tone turned solemn yet hopeful. "I took Fern in some years ago, after war orphans flooded the church's care. She's shown a spark of talent for magic, and she has nowhere else to go." Frieren blinked, seeing where this was leading. Hehader was looking at her with a pleading softness in his old eyes. "Teach her, Frieren," the priest implored quietly. "Raise her as your apprentice. It's what Himmel would have done, giving someone helpless a chance at life." Frieren was taken aback. Train an apprentice? Become responsible for a fragile human child? The idea felt daunting. She had always traveled alone, responsible only for herself, and children were unpredictable creatures. She opened her mouth to object, but Hater anticipated her reluctance. With a crafty twinkle reminiscent of his younger days, he added, "Besides, it's the will of the gods." He produced a weathered letter with a dramatic flourish. On it was scribbled some prophecy in archaic script that Frieren only half read, something about fate and guiding the orphan. It looked suspiciously convenient. Frieren narrowed her eyes at Hater. "Is that truly divine will, or the priest's lie?" she asked flatly. Hater couldn't hide a small smirk. He'd been caught. The prophecy was his fabrication, meant to guilt her into taking Fern. Frieren almost felt amused by the old trickster's audacity, but before she could respond, she felt a tiny hand slip into hers. She looked down. Fern had crept forward and taken Frieren's hand gently. The girl's small fingers trembled. When Frieren met her gaze, Fern mustered all her courage and spoke in a quavering voice. "Please, I want to learn magic. I don't want to be helpless ever again." Her earnest plea hung in the cool air. Frieren felt the sincerity and longing in those words. Memories flashed through Frieren's mind. A younger Himmel, determined to protect others. Heater, shielding frightened villagers with holy incantations. Herself standing aloof in those days, often indifferent to the human urge to connect and protect. Perhaps this was a chance for her to understand that urge better. She gently closed her hand around Fern's, steadying the little girl's shake. "Very well," Frieren heard herself say, her voice soft. "I will teach you, if that is your wish." Fern's eyes lit with disbelief and joy, and tears spilled down her cheeks. Impulsively, the child lunged forward and wrapped her small arms around Frieren's waist in a hug. Frieren stiffened in surprise at the sudden affection, but awkwardly patted Fern's head. She felt something warm bloom in her chest, a fragile bud of purpose taking root where loss had hollowed her out. From that day, Frieren and Fern began a new daily rhythm under Heiter's roof. In the mornings, under the pale light filtering through stained glass windows, Frieren taught Fern the fundamental principles of magic, how to sense the flow of mana in the air, how to speak ancient incantations with clarity, how to discipline one's mind to cast even when afraid. Fern proved an apt pupil, quiet and diligent. Though only a child, she practiced spells for hours, driven by a determination beyond her years. At first, Frieren was a reserved teacher, demonstrating spells with cool precision, correcting Fern's pronunciation with a gentle but emotionless tone. She was not used to being responsible for another's growth. But as weeks rolled on, she began to notice little things, the way Fern scrunched her nose when concentrating, or the proud smile the girl fought to hide whenever she successfully performed a new spell. Frieren found herself growing quietly fond of these signs of progress. Heiter watched their lessons from his armchair by the hearth, a satisfied sparkle in his eye. Under the guise of needing help, translating an old grimoire he'd obtained. He kept Frieren around. The tome supposedly contained research on immortality, something Hater joked might extend his life. Frieren spent evenings by candlelight, carefully deciphering its ancient runes, though she suspected Hater's true motive was simply to prolong her stay. She didn't mind. The cottage, once filled with the weight of Himmel's absence, now echoed with Fern's laughter, when Frieren accidentally conjured a flock of illusory butterflies that tickled the child's face. Bit by bit, Frieren realized that this too was a form of healing, building new memories atop the old. Under Frieren's tutelage, Fern's abilities blossomed. After some months, the girl could light a campfire with a snap of her fingers and levitate small objects with ease. But one exercise proved frustrating. A long-distance attack spell meant to strike a far-off target, in this case, a simple rock set on a fence post at the edge of the yard. Fern would chant, muster her mana, and fling forth a sparkling bolt, only for it to sputter out halfway to the mark. Again and again she tried, the rock remaining unscathed. One dusk, after countless attempts, Fern's shoulders slumped in defeat. Frieren, who had been observing quietly, approached. In her hand, she carried a flask of water. She uncorked it and wordlessly offered it to the girl. Fern drank, wiping sweat and tears from her eyes. "Maybe I just can't do it," she whispered, voice hitching. Frieren knelt to meet Fern's eye level. The elf's face was calm, but her tone held unexpected gentleness. "You will. It may take years, but you have the talent and the heart." Fern looked up at her teacher, the ageless mage who had seen centuries of wonders. To hear faith in her voice was a powerful encouragement. Fern nodded and sniffled, determination rekindling. Every day thereafter, she practiced that spell while Frieren quietly translated Hitter's grimoire nearby. At dawn, when Fern awoke, she would find Frieren already at the cliff's edge beyond the garden, hurling the same spell herself as a demonstration, a ray of golden magic arching out and shattering the rock target in one flawless shot. Fern would watch in awe as Frieren executed the feat with the grace born of long mastery. Then, cheeks set with resolve, the girl would take her stance and attempt to mimic her mentor. Seasons turned in gentle procession. The oak by Himmel's grave grew new rings. The lilies they had planted there bloomed and withered and bloomed again. Fern's gangly limbs lengthened with adolescence. On the day she finally struck the distant rock with a crackling bolt of energy, she was 13 years old and nearly as tall as Frieren's shoulder. Frieren felt a swell of pride as the stone shattered into dust under Fern's magic. The girl turned, eyes shining, seeking her approval. Frieren allowed herself a small smile, an expression that on her was as radiant as sunrise because it was so rare. "Well done," she said simply. And that was everything Fern had wanted to hear. Not long after that triumph, Frieren at last finished deciphering Hetter's mysterious grimoire. As she suspected, it contained no secret of immortality or resurrection, just an old sage's musings on life and death. When Frieren informed Hetter of this, the old priest merely gave a wheezing laugh. He hadn't truly expected a miracle to cheat his own mortality. He was content enough knowing Fern would be cared for. It was good that Fern had achieved competence in magic, for fate's wheel was turning again. One crisp morning, Heater did not rise from bed. Frieren found him pallid and weak, his breathing shallow. The time that even his prayers could not forestall had come. Heater's final moments were in the small hours before dawn. Fern knelt at his bedside, clutching his hand, tears streaming down her face. Frieren stood beside her, silent and strong, but her eyes, usually so composed, brimmed with unshed tears as well. Heater looked to them both. With difficulty, he spoke in a raspy whisper. "Fern, my dear child, you've repaid me 100-fold by growing into a fine mage. I am so proud." Fern sobbed and begged him not to leave, but Heater merely smiled and brushed a trembling hand over her hair. "Do not be sad. I go to join Himmel, and that rascal will surely demand to hear how you've been doing." His gaze shifted to Frieren. "And you thank you for giving this old man peace of mind. Promise me you'll continue your journey, for your own sake, as well as hers." Frieren felt her throat constrict. She realized tears were now slipping freely down her cheeks. Hot, unfamiliar tears. She who rarely showed emotion could not contain them at this goodbye. "I promise," she managed to say, voice thick. She gently laid her hand over Fern's, which still grasped Hader's. Together they stayed with him, making sure he was not alone at the end. Hader's last request, oddly, was that they leave the room before he drew his final breath. He did not want Fern to watch him die. Fern at first refused, clinging tighter, but Frieren, choking back her own grief, persuaded the girl that they should honor his wish. They stepped outside into the candle-lit hallway, closing the door softly. Moments later, a stillness fell beyond that door, a stillness that told Frieren the kindly priest's soul had departed. They buried Hitter beside the little chapel he had tended in his youth, per his wishes. After the modest funeral, attended by local parishioners, Frieren and Fern stood together by his headstone. Fern's tears had not yet ceased. Frieren placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Fern leaned into her mentor's side, seeking solace. Frieren spoke softly, repeating the advice Hitter had once given Fern long ago. "Make as many good memories as you can. That way, those we've lost will always be alive in our hearts." Fern looked up at Frieren and saw that the elf's eyes, though red-rimmed, held a gentle resolve. It was time to move forward. Thus, on a misty morning, Frieren and Fern departed the village that had been their home for those few years. Frieren, having fulfilled Hader's last wish by training Fern to self-sufficiency, decided to resume traveling. But she was no longer alone. Fern, now a capable mage of around 15 years, walked by her side as her apprentice, and indeed her family. They headed northward, toward lands unknown to Fern, but familiar to Frieren from the old hero's journey. The world beckoned with new purpose, not slaying demon kings this time, but perhaps something more elusive, understanding the hearts of those she'd loved and lost. They journeyed light, carrying only necessities. Fern took upon herself the role of organizing their travel supplies, having grown sensible and responsible beyond her years. She often had to remind Frieren not to waste coins on obscure magical knickknacks they didn't need. On one occasion, as they strolled through a bustling trade town named Warm, Frieren's eyes fell upon a merchant stall selling rare spell tomes and ingredients. Like a child spotting candy, the elf gravitated toward it, murmuring about a rumored spell to summon tiny fireflies. Fern gently cleared her throat. "Master Frieren, we must first replenish food and medicine. We only have so much budget," she chided softly. Frieren blinked, momentarily brought back to practicality. She had lived so long with minimal concern for daily needs, often sustaining herself via simple conjurations or the generosity of those grateful for her monster hunting, that she sometimes forgot the importance of coin and supplies. With a slight nod, Frieren allowed Fern to guide her to the grocer instead. It was a subtle role reversal, Fern keeping Frieren on task, almost like a daughter minding an absent-minded parent. Frieren didn't mind. In truth, she found it quietly endearing that Fern cared to ensure she ate and planned properly. There was a warmth in having someone by her side during campfires at night, someone who brewed hot tea with a minor flame spell and asked, "Are you warm enough, master?" before they settled to sleep under the stars. In those gentle moments, Frieren realized Fern was giving her something she never knew she needed: companionship in the long stretch of years ahead, and a tether to the present. They took on odd jobs as they traveled, much as Frieren had done alone, except now Fern was part of the bargain. Once, in a farming hamlet, a pumpkin farmer beseeched their help to harvest an entire field quickly before an early frost. Frieren and Fern obliged, using levitation magic to lift pumpkins and wind spells to direct them gently into carts. The villagers watched, slack-jawed and delighted, as baskets filled in mere minutes with what would have taken days by hand. Payment for such work rarely came in coin. Instead, Frieren negotiated for any old spell scrolls or magical lore the villagers might possess. The pumpkin farmer scratched his head at this eccentric request, but happily traded them an ancient parchment he had inherited, which supposedly contained a spell to warm beverages. That evening, as they camped at the edge of the farmer's fields, Frieren eagerly tested the newfound spell, holding her cup of tea and chanting a few melodious words. The tea began steaming perfectly. She took a sip, satisfied. Fern watched this display and softly shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. All that effort today, and in return we got a spell that heats tea, she mused aloud. Was it worth it, master? Frieren looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Of course, she replied, dead serious. Now we won't have to drink lukewarm tea. Fern couldn't help it. She burst into a light laugh. It was the first real laugh Frieren had heard from the girl since Hader's death. The sound was bright, like a bell. Frieren's usually stoic expression melted into a gentle grin. For a moment, under the early night sky, there was only the simple joy of shared laughter between mentor and pupil. On another occasion, they encountered a traveling herbalist who was struggling to clean a mossy statue by the roadside, scrubbing futilely at the stone with a rag. Fern, ever kind, went to assist and paused when she recognized the statue's form. It was a monument of Himmel, the hero, depicted in youthful glory with a sword raised high. Weather and vines had sullied the carving. The herbalist explained that Himmel had saved her life decades ago during the war. This statue was her way of honoring him, but her old arms were too frail to maintain it. Fern glanced back at Frieren, who stood a few paces away watching quietly. Without a word, Frieren stepped forward and raised her hand. She murmured an incantation. A gentle spray of water magic erupted and washed over the statue in a controlled wave, rinsing away dirt and growth. Next, a flick of her fingers conjured a soft wind that buffed the stone dry. Within moments, the statue looked renewed, Himmel's carved features noble and smiling once more, as if alive. The herbalist clasped her hands in gratitude, tears in her eyes. Frieren, however, was distant. She stepped closer to the statue, gazing up at Himmel's stone face thoughtfully. He fretted over that pose for hours. Back then, she remarked quietly. Fern caught the comment. Pose. When the capital commissioned his statue after the Demon King's fall, Frieren explained in a soft, reminiscent tone. Himmel kept changing how he wanted to be depicted. One hand on hip, both on the sword, cape flowing or at rest. It took him an absurdly long time to settle on this dramatic stance. Frieren's lips curved gently. Remembering even such a trivial anecdote of Himmel brought a pang of bittersweet warmth. That night, Fern noticed Frieren polishing something by the firelight. It was the ring Himmel had given her, the mirrored lotus catching the flicker of flames. Frieren seldom took it out, but after seeing his statue, she had felt compelled to hold it. Fern quietly asked, "Did you love Himmel?" The question was innocent. Born of a young person's curiosity, Frieren was taken aback. Love? The concept had always been elusive to her. She thought of Himmel's unwavering kindness, his final words of gratitude, the ring's symbol. Slowly she answered, "I don't know. Perhaps in my own way, I did. I certainly cherish his memory now." Fern nodded thoughtfully. In her limited years, she had come to understand that Frieren expressed feelings differently, not in big declarations, but in the way her eyes softened at memories, or how she meticulously kept every keepsake from those days. World lore and human emotions, intertwined subtly, were becoming clearer to Frieren through Fern's questions. In teaching the girl, Frieren herself was learning about empathy, about the value of fleeting moments. As they ventured further northward, leaving the well-tamed central lands behind, The air grew cooler, and the nights longer. They passed the Grusa forest, where long ago Frieren's party had battled a fearsome demon. Much had changed. Paths once perilous were now dotted with roadside shrines, commemorating lost adventurers, and new saplings grew, where battle spells had scarred the earth. One twilight, as they camped at the forest's edge, Frieren stared into the shadows of the ancient trees. Her mind drifted to a name, Qual, the elder sage of corruption. 80 years ago, during their quest, Qual had nearly annihilated them in this region with his deadly magic. Unable to kill him, Frieren had sealed the demon away beneath these woods as a desperate measure. Himmel himself used to travel here every year after, to check on that seal's integrity, a duty he took on without fail. Now Himmel was gone, and Frieren wondered, was the seal still intact? By her calculations, the magic binding would soon weaken, perhaps had already. She knew what she had to do. Frieren said that evening, as they shared a simple dinner of bread and cheese by the fire, tomorrow we will make a short detour. There is unfinished business here I must attend to. Fern glanced up from stoking the flames, her face by firelight looking so earnest. Unfinished business? Frieren hesitated, then explained in her calm, measured way, a demon I sealed long ago named Qual. His seal may be breaking. It is time to face him properly. Fern's eyes widened slightly. She had heard tales of the hero era's battles from Frieren in passing. To think one of those legendary foes was still around. Will it be dangerous? She asked quietly. Frieren managed a small reassuring smile. Not for you, I promise. We'll handle it together, as master and apprentice. Fern nodded, steeling herself. She trusted Frieren implicitly. If her master believed they could overcome an ancient demon, then Fern would do her part to support her. At dawn's light, they headed into the heart of Grusa forest. A hush lay over the woodlands. Even birds seemed reluctant to sing here. Finally they found the old site, a mossy stone altar half sunken into the earth, etched with glowing runes of sealing. Frieren's seal had kept Qual imprisoned in a petrified state for decades, but as she drew near, she saw cracks in those runes. A village elder from a nearby hamlet awaited them nervously by the altar. He wore a straw hat and carried a journal chronicling the site's history. Recognizing Frieren from descriptions passed down, the elder bowed. We had word you might come. The demon's prison. It shudders by night now, he warned. We evacuated our village just in case. Frieren gave a solemn nod. She appreciated their caution. With Fern and the elder standing back at a safe distance, Frieren approached the stone monument where Qual was sealed. Indeed, faint pulses of malignant aura seeped from the cracks. Frieren placed a hand gently on the stone, feeling the dark power thrumming beneath. She remembered vividly the battle those years ago, how Qual's signature spell Zultrak, a fearsome piercing beam, had sliced through all their defenses like paper. Many sorcerers perished trying to study and counter that magic after his sealing, but they succeeded, Frieren thought, a hint of pride stirring. In the intervening decades, humanity had not been idle. Mages across the continent, aided by Frieren's own research contributions, had developed counter-spells and wards to neutralize Zultrak. What was once unstoppable killing magic was now simply another entry in a modern mage's textbook of spells and their counters. This was one of the remarkable things about humans. Frieren realized in a short time they adapted and grew beyond what once terrified them. With a deep breath, Frieren began to unravel her old seal, controlling the process carefully. The stone prison glowed, fissured, and then shattered with an echoing crack. From within emerged Qual, towering and monstrous, stretching, as if waking from a long slumber. He was an imposing demon with ashen skin, a horned visage, and eyes that glowed malevolently. Fern, watching from afar, felt a stab of fear at the sight of such a creature, but she held her ground, heart pounding. Qual turned his gaze down toward Frieren. Despite the decades, He recognized her immediately. A slow, wicked smile spread across his scarred face. "Elven mage, we meet again," he rumbled, voice like distant thunder. "I see the hero isn't with you this time. Pity. I was hoping to repay Himmel for sealing me." There was no remorse or anger in his tone, just a chilling calm. Demons lack true emotions. They mimicked sentiments to unsettle humans. But Qual especially was known for his intellect and composure. Frieren's golden eyes hardened. Seeing Qual free stirred memories of the terror and despair of that old battle. But she stood firm, cloak stirring in the gathering magical energy. "Himmel is beyond your reach," she replied quietly. "And you will harm no one else." Qual sneered, raising one clawed hand that began crackling with ominous light. "You freed me only to face death yourself? Brave or foolish?" he hissed. "Let us see if your kind have learned anything in 80 years. Zoltrak." With that incantation, Qual unleashed his infamous spell. A spear of coruscating violet energy blasted forth, aimed straight at Frieren. Fern's heart leapt into her throat as she saw that beam. It was exactly as described in the old texts, magic that could pierce any shield. But Frieren had anticipated this. With a fluid motion, she conjured her counterspell, a complex barrier weaved from modern enchantments, specifically designed to thwart Zoltrak's frequency. The violet beam struck Frieren's shimmering shield, and to Qual's visible surprise, splintered into harmless sparks that dissipated into the air. For the first time, the demon's composure faltered. He had not expected a human-devised defense to nullify his ace so easily. Beside the elder, Fern exhaled the breath she had been holding. Frieren stood unscathed, amidst drifting motes of dissipating magic, her expression calm and resolved. "Qual," she said firmly, "while you slept, the world moved on. Your powers are no longer beyond us." The demon's eyes narrowed. Then, with a guttural growl, Qual lunged forward, chanting in the guttural demon tongue to unleash a barrage of spells more primal. Arcs of dark lightning and bursts of flame erupted around Frieren. The forest trembled as trees splintered and scorched. Frieren dodged nimbly, her elven grace carrying her lightly over tangled roots and debris. She retaliated not with raw destruction, for she did not wish to ravage the forest or endanger Fern afar, but with precise magic, shimmering chains of light shot from her fingertips, wrapping around Qual's limbs to bind him in place. The demon roared and shattered them, but each time Frieren would conjure another set, keeping him momentarily stalled. Fern watched in admiration and worry. She longed to help, but she knew stepping into the fray of such titans would only distract her master, so she did the most useful thing. She began preparing a support spell from a distance. With steady breath, Fern inscribed a magic circle on the ground, using her staff, and quietly chanted to gather mana for a protective ward that could reinforce Frieren's defenses further if needed. Qual, tiring of the stalemate, played a cunning hand. He ceased his wild offense, and instead began to inhale deeply, drawing upon the very life around him to fuel one enormous blast of Zoltrak, more powerful than the first. The air pressure dropped. Leaves from the forest floor rose and swirled toward the demon, feeding his spell. Frieren recognized this escalation and prepared her barrier once more, but would it hold against an amplified strike? Before Qual could unleash it, a voice rang out from beyond the tree line. "End a regen." Fern had finished her own casting. From the sky a rain of gleaming arrows of light, the spell End a regen, ending rain, descended upon Qual. Each arrow was small, hardly fatal alone, but there were dozens. They struck Qual's massive body in a cascade, disrupting his concentration. The demon snarled in pain, as several lodged in his flesh like burning embers. The giant Zoltrak he was building up fizzled as he staggered. Seizing the moment, Frieren invoked a spell learned long ago from Flam, her ancient master, Seal Schnit, Soul Cutter. It was a piercing ray of golden light, an attack targeting the essence of a demon rather than its physical form. Frieren's eyes flashed as she released the spell. The ray lanced out, swift and silent, and punched through Qual's chest before he could reform his defenses. The demon's red eyes widened in shock. A gurgling gasp escaped his lips. That blow had been decisive. Qual's hulking form toppled like a felled tree, crashing to the ground and rattling the very earth. The malice in his aura faded as his monstrous body began dissolving into ash, a sign of a demon truly defeated. It was done. Frieren stood amidst the settling dust, breathing hard but unharmed. Fern broke into a run towards her, skirt flying behind her, panic and relief on her face. She launched herself at Frieren, embracing her tightly. "Master, are you all right?" she asked, voice muffled against Frieren's cloak. Frieren, a bit startled by the sudden hug, gently patted Fern's head. "I'm fine thanks to you," she said softly. Indeed, had Fern not intervened, the fight might have dragged on dangerously. Frieren realized she had come to rely on this young mage at her side, not because Fern was her apprentice, but because she was her partner. Together they could overcome what alone might have been perilous. The straw-hatted elder approached, trembling with amazement and gratitude. He fell to his knees and bowed to Frieren and Fern. "Our village is safe, thanks to you. The great demon Qual is truly gone. We cannot ever repay this." Frieren just nodded, somewhat uncomfortable with the reverence. In truth, she felt that she was repaying a debt, finishing what she and her friends could not, so many years ago. Perhaps somewhere, Himmel and Hitter watched and smiled to see that lingering threat laid to rest. She allowed herself a small moment of pride in humanity's growth, and in Fern's growth most of all. Before leaving the forest, Frieren noticed the elder's inquisitive gaze upon Fern and herself as they prepared to depart. The man finally asked hesitantly, "Might you be heading further north, Lady Frieren?" Frieren inclined her head. "Yes. Why do you ask?" The elder shuffled and produced a sealed letter from his satchel. "Bishop Hyder had sent word through our clergy some years back. He mentioned if you ever passed this way, I should give you this." Frieren's eyes widened slightly in surprise. She accepted the letter and broke the seal. Inside, Heater's familiar scrawl detailed a discovery, the existence of a place called Oriole, the land where souls rest. The letter recounted that, through his research in the Holy City's archives, he found mention of Flam, Frieren's old master, having journeyed to Oriole ages ago, and meeting departed souls. It also contained clues, references to a protected archive, and a location called Vol Basin, where Flam's notes might be hidden. Heater had pieced this together after Himmel's death, suspecting that such knowledge might help Frieren find closure by allowing her to speak to Himmel one last time. The letter ended with Heater's gentle urging, "Go north, Frieren, to where souls rest. Perhaps there, you can convey what remained unsaid. I believe Flam left something for you to find. May the gods guide you." Frieren read this in silence, her heart pounding in realization. Oriole, a place where one could meet souls of the departed, where she could meet Himmel. The possibility was staggering. Fern, seeing Frieren's normally serene face flush with a spark of urgent purpose, peered at the letter curiously. Frieren carefully folded the parchment, her hands steadier than her racing heart. So this was to be her new quest, not a journey to defeat evil, but a pilgrimage of the heart to deliver her feelings to Himmel, beyond the end of his journey. Frieren felt gratitude well up for Hader's foresight. Even after death, he was guiding her. That day marked a turning point. Frieren now had a clear destination. The far north, where Oriole supposedly lay hidden at the world's end. She and Fern turned their path northward with renewed determination. But the journey to Oriole would be long, crossing into realms scarcely traveled since the fall of the Demon King. They would need guidance, resources, and perhaps an additional ally. Frieren recalled someone perfect for this, someone strong and steadfast who could help protect Fern on dangerous roads. Stark was a young warrior whom Eisen had mentored. Frieren had heard passing mentions of him in letters from Eisen before. Apparently the boy possessed tremendous strength, but was plagued by timidity. Eisen had once chuckled that Stark was a lion at heart, but one that jumps at its own shadow. The dwarf had taken Stark under his wing after finding him wandering, traumatized from a demon attack on his village. If Stark still roamed the central or northern regions, Frieren intended to find him. A warrior's might would balance their party well, and perhaps Stark could find his courage alongside them. By happenstance or fate, as Frieren and Fern followed the northern trade road a few weeks later, they came upon a settlement in a rugged canyon. The village, nestled against towering cliffs, was eerily quiet. Doors were bolted, and not a soul walked the dirt paths. Yet they heard a distant roar echoing from the canyon walls, an unmistakable, fearsome cry of a monster. The two travelers proceeded cautiously. Eventually, at the village square, they found townsfolk huddled in a cellar. With coaxing, an elder peeked out and urgently waved them in. Below, in the dim candlelight of the cellar, Frieren and Fern learned of the village's plight. A huge solar dragon had made its lair nearby and terrorized them. The only thing standing between it and the villagers was a young man, a warrior, who had appeared 3 years ago and bluffed the dragon into a standoff. Since then, the warrior had remained in the village, ostensibly as its guardian. But the truth was the dragon, and he existed in a tense impasse. "He's strong as an ox, but he's easily frightened," whispered the elder. "We fear one day the dragon will realize he hasn't actually fought it and attack in full fury." Frieren's interest piqued. "This warrior, what is his name?" she asked quietly, though she suspected the answer. "He calls himself Stark," came the reply. Fern gave Frieren a knowing glance. This was no coincidence. Frieren's eyes softened with relief and resolve. It seemed they had found Eisen's wayward apprentice just when needed. Opting for a direct approach, Frieren and Fern emerged from the cellar and called out into the open. "Stark." Frieren's clear voice echoed through the barren street. After a pause, from behind an upturned cart where he had been hiding while watching the skies, a figure rose. Stark was a tall young man with a muscular build, wearing battered armor and gripping a large battle axe. A long scar cut across his cheek, a memento of past training mishaps perhaps. His eyes were wide with alarm at first, thinking perhaps the dragon had circled behind him. But then he saw the elf and the girl approaching calmly. Stark's jaw dropped. He clearly recognized Frieren from descriptions, or perhaps even from having seen her once with Eisen. In a panic, he straightened up and tried to look more heroic, puffing out his chest. "Be you who calls my name?" he demanded, voice cracking slightly. Frieren stopped a few paces from him, Fern at her side trying not to giggle at Stark's attempted bravado. "I am Frieren," she said simply. "Eisen's comrade. He's mentioned you." At the name Eisen, Stark's tense posture faltered into surprise and a sort of embarrassment. "Master Eisen? He talked about me." Stark's face reddened a bit, as if anxious what his mentor might have said. Frieren's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "He said you had great potential." She eyed the cliffs beyond the village. High above, perched on a ledge, she could make out the sinuous outline of the solar dragon, basking in the afternoon sun. Its scales gleamed golden, capturing sunlight to fuel its inner fire. It watched the village lazily, as a cat might watch a mouse hole, patient but ready. "We're here to help with your dragon problem," Frieren continued. Stark blinked in astonishment. He had been grappling with dread and uncertainty for 3 years with this creature looming over him, and now out of nowhere arrives a legendary mage offering help. Help, he stammered. "I mean, yes, of course. I was just about to slay it myself. But reinforcements are welcome." His tone wavered between bravado and relief. Fern introduced herself kindly. I'm Fern, Frieren's apprentice. Pleased to meet you. Stark gave a clumsy salute with his axe, nearly nicking his ear. Stark of the Klee tribe. Likewise. As the sun dipped low, Frieren formulated a plan. She learned that the dragon typically descended at night to raid livestock. Stark had managed to confront it a few times at the village edge, brandishing his axe and yelling with all his might. In truth, he had never truly engaged it in combat. He'd been too terrified, but oddly the dragon had never pressed the attack either, perhaps wary or simply playing with him as a cat does. Frieren admired Stark's devotion despite his fear. He had stayed when others might have fled to protect these people. Courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear but the willingness to stand one's ground despite it. That night, under a brilliant moon, the dragon's shriek announced its approach. It soared down from its cliff perch, huge wings obscuring the stars. Villagers trembled in hiding. Stark, Frieren, and Fern stepped into the open, waiting. The solar dragon landed with a thunderous impact at the village's edge, its amber eyes surveying its prey, and noticing two newcomers with the trembling young warrior. It let out a low growl, expelling a gust of hot wind that rippled through their hair and cloaks. Frieren stepped forward calmly, raising a hand. She attempted a pacification spell first, a gentle cantrip to communicate intent, conjuring soothing lights around the beast's head. Not all monsters had to be slain. Some could be appeased or reasoned with. But this dragon was too wild, too used to getting its way through terror. It roared and swiped a massive claw, dispersing Frieren's lights with contempt. Stark tightened his grip on his axe. His legs trembled, but he planted them firmly. He remembered Eisen's training, the stance, the breathing. Still, fear buzzed in his mind. One wrong move, and the dragon's fiery breath could incinerate them. As if reading that thought, the solar dragon reared its head back, golden scales along its throat glinting, heralding an imminent blast of flame. Get down, Stark shouted on instinct. Fern swiftly cast a barrier around herself and Frieren. Frieren likewise muttered a shield charm. But before the dragon could exhale destruction, Stark acted out of reflex and training. He hurled his axe. With surprising speed and power, the heavy weapon spun end over end, cleaving through the air. It struck the dragon square in the jaw with a resounding crack, deflecting its head skyward. A torrent of white-hot flame erupted, but seared harmlessly into the night sky instead of the village. The dragon recoiled, momentarily stunned by the blow and the interruption of its attack. Stark was mortified. He hadn't meant to throw his only weapon. It was a panicked reaction. Now he stood unarmed. Oh no, he gulped, instinctively taking a step back as the dragon's fierce gaze snapped back to them, now full of rage. Frieren seized the opportunity that Stark's bold strike had created. She began chanting an incantation under her breath. Fern, understanding, provided covering fire. She launched several glimmering magic arrows at the dragon's face, aiming for its eyes to distract it. The dragon snarled, batting away the glowing bolts, but one nicked the tender membrane of its left wing. It howled in pain, shifting its stance. In that brief moment, Frieren finished her spell. The ground beneath the dragon glowed with runes, as roots of rock and earth erupted upward, ensnaring the beast's hind legs, a binding spell drawn from nature's own strength. The dragon thrashed, cracking some of the stone roots, but the binding held just long enough. Stark now, Frieren called. She didn't need to tell him what to do. His axe lay on the ground near the dragon's foreleg. Stark summoned all his courage, sprinting straight towards the massive creature. Each stride felt like an eternity to him, the heat of the dragon's body radiating against his skin. Fear screamed at him to turn back. What if it breaks free and claws you to ribbons? But he roared to drown out that inner voice. With a dive and a roll, he scooped up his axe from under the dragon's snout just as the beast snapped at him. Teeth scraped his armor, but he rolled away, heart pounding wildly. Now weapon in hand, Stark did what he had trained to do: fight. With a two-handed grip, he swung at the dragon's front limb, a tremendous blow, fueled by 3 years of pent-up anxiety and determination. The axe bit deep into scaled flesh. The dragon screeched, yanking its leg back, half laming itself in the process. The binding spell gave way as the enraged monster mustered its strength and tore free of the earthen roots, but it was injured, favoring one leg and one wing. It attempted another blast of flame at the brazen human at its feet, but Frieren and Fern were quicker. Together they cast a dual barrier, their magic combining to form a shimmering dome around Stark. The dragon's inferno washed over it, surrounding Stark in a halo of fire that left him untouched. Protected by their magic, Stark stepped forward through the flames, appearing almost spectral amid the blaze. To the dragon's disbelief, the human emerged unscathed and struck again. This time Stark aimed higher, at the creature's neck. With a shout that echoed off the canyon walls, he leapt and brought the axe down with titanic force. The blade hewed into the dragon's golden scales at the base of its throat. With a final ghastly roar that shook the night, the solar dragon collapsed, its fiery breath guttering out as life faded from its ancient eyes. Silence followed, save for the crackle of a few burning shrubs. The dragon's breath had ignited. Stark stood panting, axe still embedded in the dragon's hide, his arms trembling, not just from exertion, but from the adrenaline and shock of what he had just done. He stuttered, scarcely believing. Fern dispelled the remaining flames with a rain spell to prevent a forest fire, and hurried to Stark's side. "You did it!" she exclaimed. Beaming, Stark finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked at Fern, then at Frieren, who approached with a nod of approval. The young warrior's eyes brimmed suddenly with tears of relief. All at once, the bravado fell away, and he sank to his knees, sobbing openly from the sheer overwhelming emotion. Fear, triumph, release, all crashing over him. Fern knelt and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Frieren retrieved a water skin and wordlessly offered it to him. Stark took a long drink, steadying himself, and wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Sorry," he sniffled. "I don't usually cry, it's just, I really thought I was going to die every day for years, and now, it's over." Frieren understood perhaps better than anyone. Humans carried such heavy burdens of fear in their short lives, burdens an immortal like her was only beginning to fathom. The village emerged from their hiding places with joyous cheers. They hailed Stark as their true savior, and marveled at the famed Frieren's presence and Fern's prowess as well. That night turned into a celebration under the stars. A great bonfire crackled in the village center. The dragon's threat had lifted, and with it, a weight on everyone's hearts. Stark, initially bashful at the praise, gradually warmed to the realization that he had indeed slain the dragon. A few children ran up to him with wide eyes to ask if they could touch his axe, to which he laughed and obliged, after wiping the blood off, at Fern's insistence. For the first time in ages, Stark felt pride without immediate fear. Later in the evening, Frieren found Stark, sitting quietly at the edge of the festivities, gazing up at the starlit sky. She sat down beside him. They were silent for a while, comfortable in the quiet company. Then Frieren spoke. "Eisen would be proud of you." Stark looked down, fiddling with a loose strip of cloth on his gauntlet. "I left Master Eisen abruptly," he admitted. "We quarreled. He struck me once in anger and I stormed off. I always felt I let him down by running." He traced the scar on his cheek. Frieren regarded him with a gentle expression uncommon for her. "Even so, you took his lessons to heart. You protected these people at great risk to yourself. That's more than many would do. Eisen cares less about your mistakes, and more about what you choose to do after. You chose well, Stark. The young man's eyes glistened anew, but this time with a grateful smile. Frieren then extended an invitation. Stark, I plan to journey far north, beyond these lands, to a place called Oriole. It will be dangerous and long. Will you join Fern and me? Stark was taken aback by the offer. Me? Travel with you and Miss Fern? He glanced toward Fern, who was across the way cheerfully teaching some village girls a minor spell to make sparkles in the air. Stark's face colored slightly. Over the course of the day he had grown to respect Fern's calm capability and also notice her kind smile and bright eyes, though he would never voice that. He then imagined venturing with Frieren, a living legend, into the unknown. He swallowed nervously but felt excitement flutter in his chest. Master Eisen did always say I should see the world beyond my village, Stark murmured. And I don't really have anywhere I belong now that this place is safe, Frieren quietly corrected him. You'll always belong in any place where you choose to protect others, Stark. With renewed resolve, Stark nodded. Then yes, I'll come. I'll do my best not to slow you down. Frieren actually chuckled, a soft sound like wind through chimes. Your strength will likely save us at some point. And as for fear, everyone feels it. Do not worry. Stark found comfort in that. Hearing an ageless elf acknowledge fear was human made him feel seen and accepted. That night, under laughter and the glow of embers, a new party was formed. Frieren the mage, Fern the apprentice mage, and Stark the warrior. The journey beyond the end truly began now, with three where once Frieren walked alone. As the trio continued their travels north, a subtle new dynamic enriched their days. Fern took quickly to the role of mediator between the stoic Frieren and the sometimes excitable Stark. When Stark nervously offered to carry their heaviest packs, which he could do with ease due to his strength, Frieren saw no issue, but Fern insisted on fair sharing. We'll rotate loads, she declared, with an authority that belied her youth. No arguments. Stark learned that Fern's stern mode was perhaps even scarier than a dragon, so he sheepishly complied. Frieren hid a smile. Perhaps in this way Fern reminded her of Hitter's gentle scoldings or Himmel's practical sensibility within their old party. Stark, for his part, regaled them with stories on the road, often inadvertently humorous ones. He told of the time he trained under Eisen in the mountains, how Eisen forced him to spar with a wild bear to test his mettle. Stark ended up befriending the bear by feeding it fish, which made Eisen roll his eyes. Fern would laugh while Frieren listened with quiet amusement. These anecdotes of ordinary life and training brought a human warmth to their long march under the increasingly chill northern skies. Frieren, Fern, and Stark retraced part of the old hero's journey route in reverse, stopping at landmarks that appeared in epic songs, but were now peaceful and almost forgotten. In one abandoned fort, they encountered phantoms of the past, quite literally. It was twilight when they set camp among the ruins of a fortification, where a great battle against demons had once been won. A local rumor claimed wandering spirits appeared there. That night, as the others slept, Frieren kept watch under the pale moon. She felt a presence and turned to see a shimmering figure stepping forth from the broken archway. It was Himmel, or rather an uncanny illusion of him, young and radiant as he had been at journey's end. Frieren's heart clenched. She knew at once this could not truly be Himmel's soul. They were far from Oriole still. But the sight of him, Frieren, the phantom spoke, voice exactly as she remembered. It beckoned gently, smiling like an old friend. Frieren had heard of malicious entities that mimic loved ones to prey on the living's emotions. A lesser mind might have been fooled, but Frieren was not so easily ensnared. Still, even understanding it was false, her chest ached with longing at that familiar face. Behind her she heard Fern stir with a gasp. Fern had woken to see not just Himmel's apparition but another beside him, a hazy form of a woman with soft features. Fern's breath caught. It was her mother, who had died in the war when Fern was a toddler. Though Fern barely remembered her mother's face, the phantom wore an expression of tender love that instantly made Fern yearn forward unconsciously. "Fern, my darling," it whispered, an outstretched hand inviting an embrace. Fern rose as if in a trance, tears welling. Stark too awoke to an illusion of his older brother, the brave warrior who had told him to flee their village years ago. "Stark, I'm so proud of you," the brother's phantom said, which broke Stark's heart because he had always dreamed of hearing those words. These phantoms were drawing them in. Frieren recognized the danger. If one reached out to accept the ghostly embrace of such a specter, it could steal one's life essence, a fate that had befallen other unwary travelers. Summoning a firm, commanding tone, Frieren called out, "Fern, Stark, do not trust what you see. They are not real." Her voice snapped Fern back to awareness for a moment. Fern blinked through tears at the phantom of her mother, conflicting emotions raging inside. Meanwhile Stark, trembling, had tears streaming down his face as he apologized to the vision of his brother for running away. The phantoms pressed closer, gentle and seemingly compassionate, but their eyes glinted coldly with otherworldly hunger. Frieren knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath and steeled herself, focusing on the reality. Himmel was gone. These were mere echoes. She dispelled her personal longing, focusing on duty to her companions. With swift incantation, she conjured a brilliant orb of pure mana and flung it upward. It detonated in a pulse of searing white light, a flash designed to disrupt enchantments. The phantoms flickered at the edges. Himmel's apparition winced as if in pain. The brother's form wavered. The mother's outline crackled with static. They hissed, a horrible, unnatural sound, revealing their true nature as malicious wraiths. Enraged at being denied, the phantoms lunged forward, their visages melting into ghastly, hollow-eyed specters. Fern recoiled as the thing that wore her mother's face lunged at her with clawed, shadowy hands. But Fern had regained her sense. She raised her staff, voice shaking but resolute, and cast a banishment spell. Pater had taught her long ago to ward off evil spirits. A circle of holy light formed around the phantom, halting its advance. Stark, still emotionally raw, nonetheless mustered his courage. He swung his axe through the phantom of his brother, dispelling that illusion into mist, with a warrior's cry equal parts sorrow and fury. Frieren, for her part, faced the false Himmel. The specter tried one last trick. In a distorted version of Himmel's gentle tone it murmured, "Don't you want to see me, Frieren? I missed you so." But Frieren's eyes were icy now. "You are not him," she stated, and traced a sigil in the air. "Begone." From her palm surged a wave of silver fire, a rare spell taught by Flam for exorcising malevolent magic. The silver flames washed over the phantom of Himmel, incinerating the falsehood. The wraith shrieked and dissolved into nothingness, finally silenced. In moments it was over. The ruins fell silent again, save for the ragged breathing of Fern and Stark, and the crackle of some dying phantom fire along the stones. Fern sank to her knees, emotionally overwhelmed. Stark rested a comforting hand on her shoulder, sniffing as he wiped his own face. That was cruel," Fern whispered, referring to the phantom's manipulations. Frieren walked over and knelt before Fern, tilting the girl's chin up gently. Frieren's gaze was sympathetic. She too felt the lingering ache. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," Frieren said softly. She realized this was the first time Fern and Stark had directly confronted how their past losses still affected them. They spent the remainder of that night huddled together by the campfire, none wanting to sleep after that encounter. Frieren brewed them a calming herbal tea with a pinch of a spell to soothe nightmares. Fern quietly asked Frieren if seeing Himmel like that had hurt her. Frieren admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability, yes, it did. but it also strengthened my resolve to reach Oriol. I want to see him truly, not a hateful mirage. Fern gently placed her hand over Frieren's. We'll get there, she promised. In the silent agreement of that gesture, their bond as master and apprentice, and indeed as something akin to family, grew even stronger. Beyond such trials, their journey pressed onward. As they ventured further north, the climate grew harsh. Snow began to dust the ground, even in what should have been summer. They encountered villages fewer and farther between. In some places, scars of the old war with the demon kings still lingered, barren fields corrupted by ancient magic, or ghost towns where fear of lingering demons kept people away. But hearteningly, they also met thriving communities, a testament to humanity's resilience. In one mountain town, a statue of Eisen stood proudly in the square. The dwarf hero had apparently saved them from an avalanche ages ago. Frieren paused there and placed a hand on the statue's foot, sending a silent greeting to her old friend still living somewhere out there. It struck her that in her long life, she was seeing how her companions had individually shaped the world for the better. It filled her with a subtle pride, and also a touch of loneliness, being the one to walk through the eras, witnessing their legacies while they themselves receded into history or memory. As they approached the border of the northern plateau, they arrived at Oiserst, the last major human city before the wilds leading to Oriol. It was a city of tall spires and sturdy walls, known also as the seat of the Continental Magic Association. To cross into the far north, outsiders needed permission, a measure instituted after the Demon King's reign to control dangerous expeditions and guard against remnant threats. That meant Frieren and her party would need to be officially recognized or licensed. Frieren learned that a first-class mage license was required to legally travel onward. This license could be obtained by passing an examination held in Oiserst at certain intervals. As fate would have it, the exam was scheduled to commence within days of their arrival. Frieren had little interest in bureaucratic accolades, but this exam was a gate they had to pass through. When they registered, the exam proctors, officious mages in robes, initially raised eyebrows. Frieren was famous enough among scholars that her presence caused whispers. Was it fair for someone of her caliber to take the exam? But Frieren insisted on following due process, if only to avoid undue fuss. Fern also signed up, at Frieren's encouragement. She had grown into a formidable mage in her own right during their travels. Stark, not being a mage, was not a candidate, but he was allowed to accompany them as an observer and assistant for the journey. The exam itself spanned several stages, designed to test magical knowledge, combat ability, and heart, qualities necessary for a first-class mage. Fern found herself among many young aspiring mages, and a few older ones, all eyeing Frieren with awe or wariness. One night before the first trial, Fern confessed nervousness. "Master, perhaps I shouldn't participate. I only need you to get the license so we can go north." But Frieren shook her head. "Fern, this is as much for you as for the journey. You have the skill. Don't underestimate yourself. I have lived long enough to recognize a great mage in the making." Fern blushed at the praise. "But if by some chance I pass, and you didn't, that would be awkward," she joked lightly, trying to mask her anxiety. Frieren actually smiled and said, "Then I will become your apprentice." The absurd image of Frieren as her pupil made Fern giggle. It eased her heart to see Frieren so at peace with whatever outcome. It taught her that doing one's best mattered more than worrying about results. In the first stage, they navigated a sprawling labyrinth filled with traps and magical puzzles beneath Oiserst. The association had seeded the labyrinth with illusions and creatures to test ingenuity. Frieren moved through it composed and efficient, often dismantling illusions with a mere glance, recalling spells from centuries past that countered them. Fern solved a complex rune puzzle by remembering something. Frieren taught her about ancient scripts. At one juncture, they had to work with other examinees to bridge a flooded chamber. Fern conjured stepping stones of ice while another mage stabilized them with earth magic, impressed by her creativity. Stark, allowed to accompany for safety, refrained from intervening, but his presence and thumbs up from the sidelines bolstered Fern's confidence at critical moments. One notable trial in the labyrinth was facing Spiegel, a water mirror demon that could duplicate any challenger. When Frieren entered its chamber, it split the reflection from a pool, and a perfect copy of Frieren emerged to battle her. For the first time in years, Frieren found herself tested in magical combat by an opponent with her own spells and form. The others arriving at that chamber, including Fern, watched in astonishment as two Frierens traded spells of breathtaking power, each anticipating the other's moves. It was like watching a dance of mirrors. Ultimately, Frieren outwitted the demon by doing something it could not anticipate. She deliberately left herself open to a hit, taking a blast of her own thunder spell full on. The audience gasped as she crumpled, but it was a feint. The demon, believing her defeated, dropped its guard for a split second, enough for Frieren to unleash a hidden dagger of energy straight into its reflective core. The copy shattered into water, and the Spiegel shrieked as it dissolved back into the pool. Frieren stood, a bit singed but victorious. Her copy had all her knowledge and skill, but lacked her willingness to endure pain or sacrifice for a win. A profoundly human trait, ironically. Fern rushed to Frieren, concerned, but Frieren smiled reassuringly. It was just a minor shock. I've had worse in thunderstorms, she teased lightly. They pressed on. By the end of the labyrinth stage, both Frieren and Fern had performed exceptionally, and it did not escape Frieren's notice that Fern often took the initiative to help others or think creatively under pressure. The examiners certainly noticed too. The final stage was less about magic and more about character. The examinees were interviewed by Cyrie, a legendary great mage, and one of the exam's proctors, known for her keen intuition. Cyrie was a petite, ancient woman with eyes sharp as hawks. Rumor said she was once a disciple of Flam, which made Frieren keenly interested to meet her. One by one, candidates were called into a grand hall to speak with Cyrie privately. When Fern's turn came, she went in nervously. Stark and Frieren waited outside, Stark fidgeting more than Frieren. "She'll be all right, right?" he whispered. Frieren nodded calmly. Inside, Cyrie asked Fern not about spells, but about why she pursued magic. Fern answered honestly. She had learned magic to not be helpless, to live up to the sacrifices others made for her, and now to accompany Frieren on a journey that meant a lot to her master. Cyrie noted the sincerity and also that Fern's motivation included devotion to Frieren, a selfless aspect. Then Frieren's turn came. When Frieren entered, Cyrie's stern face flickered with recognition. "Frieren, Flam spoke of you in her notes." That simple statement made Frieren's breath catch. Cyrie continued. "She said an elf child with immense talent and a guarded heart traveled with her for a time. She left something for you, you know, in the north." Frieren felt a surge of emotion, confirmation that Flam indeed intended her to find Oriole and whatever wisdom was there. But the interview was about the license. Cyrie asked why Frieren needed it. Surely an accomplished mage like her had little need for titles. Frieren answered plainly. "I have somewhere to go that requires it. I journey to Oriole, to fulfill a promise and bid farewell properly to someone dear." Cyrie considered, her piercing eyes seeming to read Frieren's soul. In it she likely saw an elf who had grown far beyond the detached girl Flam first taught, an elf carrying centuries of care and regret, now driven by love and longing, rather than mere curiosity. Cyrie surprised Frieren by asking, "Tell me, who is the stronger mage, you or your apprentice?" Frieren blinked. It was an unorthodox question. She answered thoughtfully, "In raw power and experience, I am. But Fern has something I lost, and had to rediscover, the earnest, unyielding drive of a human heart still young. In that sense, There are things she can achieve that I cannot. Iteria nodded sagely, and a small smile crept into her wrinkled features. The interview ended, and Frieren left uncertain of the result. When the exam results were announced, a crowd gathered in the great hall. A registrar read off names of those who had attained first-class mage status. Fern, he called, and cheers erupted from those who knew her. Stark whooped loudly, pumping a fist in the air. Fern clasped her hands over her mouth in disbelief and joy. She turned hopefully to see if Frieren's name would follow. The list went on. But Frieren was not called. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Frieren had been failed. Some onlookers were baffled. How could that be? But Frieren herself remained composed, almost amused. She glanced at Seri, who watched from the balcony, and saw the knowing twinkle in the old mage's eye. Frieren realized the intention Fern's success alone was enough for their journey, and perhaps Seri intuited that giving Fern the title while denying Frieren was a way to honor the new generation and keep Frieren free of entanglements. After all, Frieren needed no validation. Fern did. Fern looked anxious, as though feeling it unfair. She rushed to Frieren. Master, I don't understand. You were incredible in the trials. Why? Frieren placed a hand on Fern's shoulder gently. This license was always just a formality for me. Now we have what we need to proceed, thanks to you. She gave Fern a proud nod. First-class mage Fern, shall we depart? Fern smiled softly, understanding that Frieren truly didn't mind. In fact, Frieren seemed prouder that Fern had been recognized, a testament to how far her apprentice had come. Syria later quietly passed Frieren a sealed bundle. Flam's notes that Hader and Eisen had sent for them to find. In it Frieren found a sketch of Oriol's distant mountain, and a message from Flam herself. For my dear Frieren, so that you may find what I found. A chance to speak your heart at journey's end. Frieren held those notes close, gratitude swelling. And so, with Fern officially licensed to guide them into the northern plateau, Frieren's party left Oysterst behind. The guards at the northern gate, seeing Fern's fresh first-class insignia and letters of passage, opened the heavily fortified doors that few adventurers passed. Beyond lay the untamed expanse of the far north, a land of perpetual winter twilight, where old battlefields and demon haunts dotted the landscape. As they ventured forth into swirling snow and biting winds, the three huddled their cloaks tight and pressed on, step by step. Despite the cold and the unknown ahead, Frieren felt an unexpected warmth within. She glanced to her side. Fern walked with head high, her staff leaving determined marks in the snow, and Stark flanked her other side, axe on shoulder and eyes scanning for threats, ready to defend his companions. Frieren realized this was perhaps what Himmel had felt, leading their old party, a sense of unshakable trust in those beside you. She allowed herself a contented smile that the wind quickly hid. They had all journeyed far, in more ways than distance. On their way north, they encountered marvels and perils aplenty, each adding threads to the rich tapestry of their shared story. They found a hidden hot spring in the Etwas Mountains, where for the first time in a long while, they could relax. There was a rare moment of levity as Stark, upon stepping into the hot water, blushed beet red and nearly fainted from the heat, causing Fern to giggle that perhaps dragons didn't bother him, but a hot bath would be his end. Frieren discovered she still adored stargazing on clear northern nights. One evening she quietly showed Fern and Stark how to spot an old constellation Flam once pointed out to her, a pattern elves called the Guardian, that looked like a watchful figure with a staff. She mused that it rather resembled Hyder watching over them, which made them smile. They also came across traces of old comrades. At one remote crossroads stood a pair of weathered statues, half buried in snow. One was of a stern warrior named Kraft, whom Frieren had known centuries ago, the other of a priestess. They had been heroes in their own time, long before Frieren's journey with Himmel. Locals had all but forgotten their names, calling them simply the Forgotten Heroes. Frieren, however, remembered Kraft's booming laugh and how he competed arm wrestling with Eisen once. She brushed snow from the statue's face and bowed respectfully, whispering an elven prayer for the deceased. The weight of her long memory surfaced again. She spanned generations, remembering those even history had dimmed. Seeing this, Fern and Stark gained a deeper appreciation for how alone Frieren must have felt for so long, carrying all those memories. But now, they were here to share some of that burden. There were battles, too, in those northern wilds. Not all demons had vanished with the Demon King. A few lingered in pockets of dark power. One cunning demoness named Aura the Guillotine, a former lieutenant of the Demon King, attempted to ambush them with a band of followers, seeking to remove the famed Frieren, who now traveled their territory. Aura was said to be a strategist who never lost her cool. She tried diplomacy at first, sending envoys claiming to seek peace. But Frieren, having known demons' true nature, saw through the ruse at once. She struck down the peace envoys, who were actually executioners in disguise with swift spells before they could harm anyone. This landed Frieren and company briefly in a human lord's dungeon, as the naive local baron believed Frieren had attacked emissaries unjustly. But when night fell, Aura's agents revealed their treachery by murdering guards and kidnapping that baron, named Graf Granat, to force the town's surrender. Frieren's instincts were vindicated. Fern and Stark sprang into action to rescue the baron, while Frieren blasted apart the dungeon bars with minimal effort. She remarked dryly that human jails weren't designed to hold first-class mages. In a tense confrontation at the baron's manor, Fern and Stark fought side by side against Aura's top lieutenants, Lugner, who wielded blood magic, and Lenya, an assassin quick as lightning. Stark's axe met Lugner's clawed strikes in a fierce exchange, while Fern engaged in a deadly dance of spells with Lenya's nimble blade. There were moments Stark's old fear threatened to resurface. Blood magic is terrifying, warping one's own lifeblood into weapons. But he thought of how Fern and Frieren relied on him now. He roared defiance and shielded Fern from a potentially lethal strike, taking a gash across his arm but breaking the momentum of the enemy. Fern then cleverly used a reflection spell on one of Frieren's polished spare crystals to bounce her magic bolts around Stark, catching Lugner off guard from behind and felling him. Lenya, seeing her partner down, lunged at Fern in desperation. But Stark, wounded arm and all, intercepted, disarming her with a powerful swing that knocked her dagger away. The ambushers were defeated, and Granat freed, humbled by the realization Frieren's lack of emotion was in fact level-headed wisdom that saved his people. Frieren herself went on to confront Aura directly outside the city walls. Aura, a tall horned demoness with a cruel smirk, had set a trap. A legion of undead soldiers she had raised, hoping to overwhelm Frieren with numbers and break her calm. Instead, Frieren invoked a single grand spell, one of Flam's masterpieces that caused the very stars to shimmer and then streak down like radiant arrows. Each undead soldier was pierced and purified in an instant, the sky raining light. Aura's confidence cracked as she realized she was outmatched by this slayer elf who showed no fear, only resolve. In a final exchange, Aura attempted to behead Frieren with invisible guillotine-like mana blades, hence her moniker. Frieren, remembering an old lesson from Ciri's notes about the subtle distortion those blades made in air, sidestepped each lethal slice with uncanny grace. She closed the distance and ended Aura's long, malicious existence with a blade of pure mana conjured in her hand. A simpler, precise method, as opposed to flashy spells, out of respect to minimize further collateral damage. Aura's head fell from her shoulders before she even comprehended her defeat, dissolving into ash. In the aftermath, Frieren's party helped give the fallen human soldiers a proper burial. Graf Granat insisted on holding a funeral for all who perished defending the town. At the somber ceremony, Frieren stood with Fern and Stark among mourners, thinking of how Himmel would have done the same, honor the dead with dignity, no matter how small the battle. Grunet thanked Frieren privately, acknowledging he learned a hard lesson. Frieren merely told him, "Live on and help your people rebuild. That is thanks enough." As they left that domain, Grunet gifted Frieren a small grimoire he had falsely boasted of, claiming it controlled a protective barrier. Flam had set, which turned out to be a decoy. Frieren accepted it amicably, later chuckling with Fern that collecting spells had become such a habit she even appreciated a fake one, if only as a memento of a place. Finally, after many trials, they neared the far northern end of the continent. The very air felt different, thin and tingling with ancient magic. Aureole was close. Even in Frieren's long life, she had rarely ventured this far. Here, the auroras danced at night in cascading curtains of green and purple, as if heralding their approach to something sacred. Fern and Stark often stood in awe of the sky's beauty, and Frieren would quietly recount that Himmel once mused souls might live in the lights, painting the sky to speak to those below. Fern listened with a soft smile, imagining her adoptive father Heiter, adding a golden star to the aurora for them. In those final days of travel, they came upon a tranquil meadow blanketed in snowdrops, a type of delicate white flower that blooms even in cold. Legend had it that this meadow was where Flam last camped on her journey to Aureole, a millennium ago. There, Frieren found something unexpected, an old weathered staff planted upright in the ground, wrapped in vines. It was Flam's staff, unmistakably, as Frieren remembered it from childhood. Flam must have left it as a marker, or perhaps a gift. Frieren carefully removed it from the frozen earth. Though worn by time, it still thrummed with faint enchantment. She held it and closed her eyes, almost sensing Flam's guiding presence. Perhaps this too was intended for her. She decided to carry it onward, a piece of her mentor accompanying her to the destination Flam herself had reached so long ago. At last, one pale morning, they saw it. Aureole, the land where souls rest. It was a high valley nestled between glacial peaks, bathed in an ethereal golden light, with no clear source, as if dawn had come and decided to linger eternally. The air was warm, despite the surrounding snow, and a gentle hum of magic resonated all around. At the valley's center lay a serene lake with waters still and mirror-like, reflecting the sky flawlessly. On the far side of the lake stood ancient monoliths, carved with runes of remembrance, and beyond them, a colossal stone arch. This was the gateway where it was said, the souls of departed heroes and loved ones could manifest. Frieren's heart pounded in her chest. This was the place of miracles Flam wrote about. Ferd reached over and took Frieren's hand, squeezing it encouragingly. Stark set down his pack quietly, sensing this was a moment to be approached with reverence. They advanced slowly, each footstep deliberate on the soft mossy ground. Frieren felt as though she was crossing an invisible threshold between the mortal world and something beyond. Though she was typically calm, now her hands trembled slightly, with anticipation, with hope, and even with fear. What if Himmel's soul did not appear? What if she could not find the right words after all? At the lake's edge, Frieren took a deep breath. She stepped forward, onto an array of stepping stones that led a short way over the water to the monoliths. Fern and Stark stayed a respectful distance behind on the shore, giving her space but ready to support her if needed. Frieren approached the towering arch of stone. It was engraved with countless names. She noticed Eisen's handwriting etched Himmel's name there, likely during Eisen's own past visit. After receiving word from Hader, so Eisen had made sure Himmel's soul would know to appear here. Her eyes stung with gratitude towards her old dwarf friend. In a clear, steady voice that only quavered at the very end, Frieren spoke. "Himmel, it's Frieren. I've come, as I promised. I journeyed beyond the end, to see you once more." The valley responded with gentle silence. Then the waters of the lake began to shimmer and swirl, as if stirred by an invisible hand. From the golden light emerged a figure stepping through the arch. Himmel's soul, youthful and radiant, appeared as though walking out of a memory. He looked exactly as he did on the day they parted at the meteor shower lake, armor shining and eyes bright. Frieren felt an overwhelming emotion swell from deep within, a mixture of happiness, sorrow, relief, and love. She swallowed hard, her composed mask falling away entirely as tears filled her eyes freely. Himmel smiled, that familiar, heart-melting smile. Frieren, he greeted softly, voice echoing slightly as though from afar. You took your time, didn't you? He teased exactly as he used to, gentle and light, but there was a catch in it, as if he too was holding back tears of joy. Frieren let out a choked laugh that was half sob. She stepped closer, almost afraid that if she hurried the vision might vanish. But he was real, or as real as a soul could be. She raised a trembling hand, and Himmel met it with his own ghostly one. They couldn't truly touch, but Frieren felt a warmth nonetheless. For a long moment she simply looked at him, memorizing every line of his face anew, marveling that he was before her. All the things she had thought to say rushed to her mind at once, and she struggled to begin. Himmel, sensing her turmoil, spoke first softly. It's all right. I'm here. Tell me everything. Those simple words, full of patient understanding, undid her. Frieren's tears spilled over, trailing down her cheeks. Her shoulders shook, and she gave a small nod. And so Frieren began to talk. In a halting voice at first, then gaining strength, she told Himmel about what had happened after he died, how she regretted not knowing him better when they had time, how she had realized too late the value of the moments they shared. She spoke of Hitter's cunning plan to entrust Fern to her, of raising Fern, and how the girl had become a fine mage. She spoke of meeting Stark and seeing anew the bravery of humans through him. She recounted the journey north, facing Qual, honoring Flam's guidance, overcoming Aura, all to reach this place to deliver words from her heart. Himmel listened with an encouraging smile or a sympathetic wince in the appropriate places, as when she described Qual's fierce battle, but mostly he just gazed at her with profound fondness that made her feel totally accepted. Finally, Frieren voiced what she had held in her heart for decades. Himmel, I'm sorry I never truly thanked you for everything. I'm sorry I didn't try to understand you sooner. Traveling with you was one of the happiest times of my life. Even if I didn't realize it then, I miss you. I cherish every memory of our journey, fleeting as it was. You were my friend. And more than that, I think, you were family to me. Perhaps I even, she paused, breath hitching. The word love hung unspoken yet understood. In their own way, each had loved the other, even if it was never spoken aloud in life. Himmel's eyes softened. He reached as if to wipe her tears, his translucent hand passing just near her wet cheek. Oh, Frieren, he said quietly. You don't need to apologize. I knew you know. Even if you never said it, I knew you cared in your own way. Seeing you come all this distance for me now, hearing you say these things, it was worth the 50-year wait. And then some. He smiled through what looked like tears gathering in his own eyes now. The soul took a breath as if to steady himself, a very human gesture that made Frieren's heart ache with tenderness. I have something to confess too. Himmel continued with a gentle laugh. I used to try so hard to impress you on our journey. I probably looked very full of myself sometimes, striking poses for statues, boasting about heroics. It's just because, well, I admired you. You had all the time in the world, and yet you chose to spend those 10 years with us, protecting us with your magic, even if you acted like it was no big deal. I treasured every moment of that time. He chuckled softly. Remember when I told you at the end of the journey, No tearful goodbyes because it'd be embarrassing when we met again. I said that hoping it would make parting easier, but truthfully, when you flew off that day, I almost cried anyway. Frieren closed her eyes, twin tears falling as she recalled him standing on that bridge waving goodbye. How could she have guessed? They talked and talked as the light in the valley shifted, like time meant nothing. Perhaps it didn't in Oriole. Minutes or hours, who could tell? Fern and Stark watched from afar, not wishing to intrude but deeply moved by the reunion taking place. Fern leaned on Stark's shoulder, tears in her eyes as well. "I'm so happy for her," she whispered. Stark nodded, wiping his face with a sleeve. "Me too. She really needed this." They quietly stepped away to give Frieren true privacy, heading a bit further along the lake's edge to admire wildflowers, though keeping within sight in case Frieren needed them. At length, as all important words were shared, Frieren and Himmel fell into an easy conversation, just like old times. He asked her about adventures she had after their quest. She asked him light-heartedly if the afterlife was treating him well. He joked that he was popular in the soul's realm for being a hero, but he mostly spent time watching over his aged comrades and waiting for them. Himmel then said something that made Frieren laugh aloud. A musical, liberated sound Stark and Fern heard echoing. He teased her about her penchant for collecting silly spells. "I still remember you going on and on about that spell to change fruit flavors." He grinned. Frieren laughed through her tears. "I still use that one. You'd like sour grapes. They're quite good." They both laughed, and for a moment it was as if two friends were just catching up under the sun as any others might. But slowly Frieren noticed the golden glow intensifying, the sign that the meeting's time was nearing its end. Himmel's form grew slightly more luminous. She felt panic rise. She wasn't ready to say goodbye again so soon. Perhaps he sensed it, for he took on a reassuring expression. "Frieren, it's okay. You gave me a wonderful farewell, and not just farewell. You let me know that our friendship truly meant something lasting to you. That's more than I could ever ask." Frieren bit her lip. "Will I see you again, here in time?" Himmel's soul flickered kindly. "Someday perhaps, when it's your time to cross over for good. But not before, Frieren. You have a lot of life yet to live. Decades, centuries, who knows? And you're not alone anymore. You have companions again." He nodded towards Fern and Stark in the distance. Frieren glanced back at her two dear young friends, who quickly pretended not to be watching, and instead waved innocently. She smiled tenderly. "Yes, they are my family now as well. I will take care of them and cherish the time we have as you all taught me." Himmel's form was now growing gradually brighter, faint motes lifting from it. The time approached. Frieren felt tears flow freely, but they were no longer of regret. They were of gratitude and love. Himmel looked at her one last time with that boyish, charming grin. "No tearful goodbyes, remember?" he said softly, though tears shone in his own eyes. Frieren, recalling that line with a bittersweet twist, actually let out a light chuckle amidst her crying. She wiped her face, though the tears kept coming. "Right. It would be embarrassing when we meet again," she replied, voice breaking slightly on the familiar phrase. She straightened up and tried to smile through the tears. "Until we meet again, Himmel." She raised her hand in a little wave, just as she had done on that bridge 50 years past, but this time fully present in the moment. Himmel raised his hand in return, a warm glow surrounding him now. "Until we meet again, Frieren. Thank you for everything. Live well." With that, his soul's form slowly dissolved into countless sparkling lights, like a flurry of fireflies lifting towards the sky. Frieren watched, head tilted up, tears flowing but a peaceful look on her face, as those lights scattered and eventually disappeared into the gentle sunlight of Oriole. Frieren remained by the lake for a while, silently reflecting. allowing herself to feel the mixture of aching loss and profound relief. She had said what she needed to say. The centuries-old weight on her heart was lighter now. Fern and Stark quietly came to her side. Fern slipped an arm around Frieren's waist in comfort. Frieren responded by draping her own arm around Fern's shoulders and pulling the girl close. Stark stood respectfully nearby, smiling at Frieren with encouragement and wiping a tear from his own eye. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. In the sublime quiet of that sacred valley, Frieren's tears gradually ceased. She breathed in deeply, the air sweet and light. The scenery around them shimmered, perhaps a blessing from the goddess of this realm, or just the sun breaking through clouds. Eventually, Frieren turned to her companions, her eyes red but shining with a gentle contentment. "Thank you," she said to both of them, voice soft and full of meaning. Fern reached up to squeeze Frieren's hand on her shoulder. Stark gave a cheerful grin. "We're with you, always." They lingered a bit longer in Oriole, allowing Frieren to carve Himmel's name a little deeper into the arch with Flam's staff so that even in centuries more it would not fade, and to silently send thoughts to Hyder and others beyond as well. When it was time to depart the land of souls, Frieren did so with a calm heart. The trio walked back across the stepping stones and through the valley. As they left Oriole's boundary, Frieren plucked one of the snowdrop flowers and tucked it carefully into her spellbook, a keepsake of this place. She looked back only once, seeing the golden valley recede. It was not a look of longing, but of fond farewell and promise kept. The journey home was before them now, perhaps filled with new quests, but none more important than the growth and bonds they now shared. As they traversed the snowy pass out of Oriole, the sun began to set in brilliant colors. Frieren felt a gentle warmth on her face from the last rays of daylight. She closed her eyes and imagined, just for a moment, that it was Himmel's hand, warm on her cheek in farewell. The light breeze carried a faint whisper, maybe only her imagination, of his voice. "No more regrets, Frieren." She opened her eyes and smiled softly. "No more regrets," she repeated under her breath. That night, under a sky once again adorned with countless stars, Frieren's party made camp. Stark soon drifted to sleep, exhausted and snoring softly by the embers of the fire. Fern was curled up in her blanket, but her eyes were open, staring at Frieren thoughtfully. Frieren was sitting against a log, Flam's old staff across her lap, gazing into the embers. Sensing Fern's gaze, she turned. "Can't sleep?" Frieren asked gently. Fern shook her head. After a pause she ventured, "Master, do you feel at peace now?" It was a delicate question, but Fern had earned the right to ask it. Frieren considered, then gave a slow nod. "Yes, Fern, I do. My heart feels warm." She touched her chest as if confirming it. "Warmer than it has in a long, long time." Fern smiled, a little relieved smile. She moved from her bedding to sit beside Frieren. Without a word, Frieren opened her arm and Fern nestled in, resting her head on Frieren's shoulder. Frieren stroked Fern's long purple hair absent-mindedly, much as a mother would. They watched the embers together. "Thank you for staying with me through it all," Frieren said softly. Fern responded, "Of course, that's what companions are for." Then with a playful lilt she added, "And besides, you're stuck with me. You promised Priest Heder you'd look after me. Remember?" Frieren chuckled gently. Stuck indeed. She tilted her head back to look at the infinite stars. This time, unlike before, she felt she truly appreciated their beauty and the ephemeral beauty of life beneath them. Fern followed her gaze upward. After a moment she murmured a question. "What do you think happens to souls after Oriole?" Frieren pondered. "I'm not certain. Some say they eventually move on to be reborn, or join the eternal light of the goddess. But maybe," she mused, "they simply watch over those they loved until those souls join them, and then together they journey onward. Fern nodded, liking that idea. She yawned, the long day finally catching up to her. Frieren noticed and smiled. Rest, Fern. We have a long journey ahead tomorrow. Fern shifted to return to her bedroll, but Frieren gently held on to her a moment longer. Stay until you fall asleep, Frieren offered. Fern happily complied, closing her eyes against Frieren's shoulder. Within minutes, her breathing evened out as she drifted to sleep, safe and comforted.